Hi, Kelsey. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Am I
Okay,
only
perfect.
two participants?
All
Yes.
right, we have
Cool.
you're it.
Cool. I
um,
think that,
okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through maybe the past 3 weeks really quickly,
yeah,
go
sure.
over some of the materials that have been posted, and then I'll give you a chance if you to ask any questions you might have. And if you
Yes,
could,
I'd have questions about this.
write out your question as a chat function in Zoom.
Let's see, where is that? Oh, the chat. Yeah, I found it.
Okay, yeah. So write out your questions if you can, and so I can read it out and then share it with others because I'm going to be posting a recording of this as
Okay,
well.
perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So if there were others on here, they would see the same thing.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, thanks for doing this Zoom meeting. I feel like this will be very helpful.
okay, no problem. Normally it was required last year. This year, however, it was not put on the schedule of classes. So
Right.
can you see my screen right
Yes,
here?
I can.
Okay. Let's go to 401 course, which is right here. Okay, so here you can see we have the 401 course Canvas page, and several things have been posted for week 1, week 2, and week 3, week 4. And all of these basically are designed to help you with your business sustainability audit. So as I mentioned in the class announcement and email, you can pick any local business or a local office of some type. The business can be food related. You know, students have done real estate offices, food related businesses, construction companies. They've even asked local, um, campus based offices such as their department office, for example. So there's really no limitation as to what you pick for this particular audit. I think it would be easier if you pick somebody locally because you can then go to the site itself much more easily than if you pick something far away, for example. Or if you picked a very large corporation, sometimes they don't have a local office. They might have a lot of information online about their business practices, but they might not have a site that's accessible. So basically, what you're interested in and what is doable are kind of the prime driving factors in this business audit. So what is a business audit about? So there's a lot of resources on here for that. And you can see in week 3, uh, there is an example of, for example, a sustainability engagement letter. So sometimes you may not need this. You may need to write a formal letter to the business. They may need to show it to their upper management just to okay it, to say, okay, you know, the student is doing this. They might come in, you know, basically to set the parameters of whatever that audit might be. In some cases, and I don't anticipate this being a need, but I've given you an example of a confidentiality agreement. Sometimes a business might say, look, you know, if whatever we talk to you, you can use that information in general without putting names to any of the information that we give you. So they may have you sign some type of confidentiality agreement. So there's an example of it that I've given. Sometimes, you know, a business may ask for some type of NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. I don't see that actually happening. I've never heard that happening, but that might be the case. So, you know, you have some examples of those. I've also provided an example of a questionnaire, but this is from a supplier standpoint. So it's a specific type of business, one that supplies things, goods, specifically. You may not pick that kind of business. There's also an example of a sustainability assessment. And I'm going to click on that so I can go through it really quickly. So this is a green audit assessing your business. Okay, and so in this one, actually, I'm going to open this up for a second. Hold on, if I can. It's a little bit easier to go through the PDF as opposed to looking at the Canvas site itself. Can you see the sustainability audit right now? or it's in my, it opened up as a PDF. I suspect maybe you
It's
can.
still on the Canvas, like it shows
Okay,
us. Yeah.
let me switch that. A second here. Okay, you should be able to see it now.
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's great. So this is an example of a sustainability audit, and this particular audit includes an employee survey, office building survey, a carbon footprint analysis, an on-site visit. The on-site visits were likely used to generate the building survey as well as the carbon footprint analysis. Of course, for the carbon footprint analysis, the person doing this may have looked at things like utility bills, energy bills, and whatnot. Okay, not for our purposes. You have to do again what is feasible given the type of business that you are surveying, and also what they're willing to share with you. They may not be willing to share certain types of records, for example, utility bills, right? Or they may let you talk to just the manager and maybe let you come to the site once and kind of observe their practices. Whatever that is going to drive your audit. So this one is fairly comprehensive. That's why I kind of posted it. So what kinds of surveys did they do? They had an employee survey. And in this particular survey, they gauged employee awareness about sustainability related issues. You don't have to do employee awareness related questions. You can do questions about actual employee practices. For example, if you are surveying a restaurant and you notice that they use a lot of plastic, so you could actually ask the employees, typically, what are your practices with respect to disposing of plastic or paper items? You can just ask the employees. Instead of asking the employees, you could also kind of hang out and just observe them as well. You don't have to necessarily ask those questions. But let's say the focus, you are doing an office that is a professional office. People sit in front of computers. They commute in from other places. You could develop an employee survey that is primarily geared around commuting, using electric vehicles, bicycling, or walking to work, something like that. It doesn't have to be about like recycling paper or waste handling or things of that sort. So really the survey will be driven by what your type of business is and what you are able to do. And so again, here are some examples of the questions that they use. And then the survey also looked at the carbon footprint and using things such as utilities, travel, and commuting, okay? The carbon footprint of the particular business there. And so, and carbon footprint typically, and if you've taken sustainability related classes earlier, which I think most of you have because you have to for this course, you know that you can convert any type of energy usage into carbon dioxide, right? Used. And so, and that you aggregate that carbon dioxide use across different categories to kind of get a total carbon footprint. So cars use energy and they produce waste. Electricity, the same can be said for direct waste, the same can be said for travel behavior. Each one of these things have a certain amount of, and here they talk about it. Let's see if I go into the previous slides here. In total tons or tons per employee. Okay, so there's a certain amount of CO2 produced. Let's say for the entire company, you can calculate that and then divide by number of employees to get a per capita or per employee carbon footprint. You don't have to do this, but this is just another example of a thing that you could do. You can do an on-site visit. I highly recommend that just to kind of get a sense where you do a little bit of participant observation, where you kind of hang back and you observe what the actual practices are, how the business is conducted on a day-to-day basis, and you look for things that are related to sustainability. And for the on-site visit, what I would do is I would develop the kinds of things that you are going to observe before you go there. So, for example, you conduct an on-site visit and you say, "Hey, I'm going to watch." The staff at this particular office for an hour, and I'm going to see typically what they do in that hour. And I'm going to see how they dispose of waste, and I'm going to see their energy usage in that hour, right? And so, you sit there for an hour and you observe, okay, employees are just sitting in front of a computer. The computer is typically on for an hour. They don't really do much beyond that. Sometimes they get up and they go and they make coffee or whatever. That's not in an office. You might go and look at a business that is food related, and there you are looking at actual in real time employees, how they are, for example, taking products out of containers, where those containers actually go, how they're disposed of, how food is handled, how waste food is handled as well. For example, restaurants may use fresh ingredients, and they may lump everything into one giant trash pile instead of maybe composting, right? So one of your recommendations could be, well, these guys are disposing food items that could potentially be used in a compost a bin of some type. So, so you have to do a little bit of thinking before you go as to exactly what you'll be observing. And my basic take on all of this is do something that is doable, that makes sense to you, that is straightforward. If you try to do too many things, and especially too many things that are complex, more often than not, we end up doing them not very well. Right? So if you're going to go do a site visit, you're going to do a carbon footprint analysis, it's perfectly fine. Say, look, there are a lot of things that contribute, for example, to waste in this facility. There are a lot of things that contribute to the carbon footprint. I'm only going to look at 2 of these things, right? And you state that in your report, and that is perfectly fine. There are a lot of things that I want to talk to employees about, but because of confidentiality, time, types of issues, I'm only going to focus on this area. I'm just going to focus on employee attitudes towards commuting, right? Something of that sort. Okay.
So, question real fast. So we can pick, would you recommend that we pick whatever we observe, we pick like one thing that they're doing there and kind of focus on that instead of doing like focusing on more than one thing?
I would say maybe 1 or 2 things max, because
Okay.
it's not humanly possible to observe everything else.
Right.
Right. Exactly. So that's a good question. I mean, in the end, the hope is that you generate something that you can give back to the business that they find useful, right? And what do businesses, and even let's say you're auditing a local Cal State Northridge department office, right? So the hat that you should have on is, what can I give them that oftentimes when people do reports, whether it's sustainability or some other type of audit, the impact or the tone can be very negative sometimes, right? You point out all the flaws,
right,
and anybody can point out a million flaws, and that's kind of not the point. The point is, this is who you are, this is what you could do better, and this is what's practical and achievable. Okay, and so if you want to make that small incremental change in that particular office, the best thing to really do is sort of point out the things that they can actually change, right? As opposed to like, hey, you should get solar panels on top of your building, when it's not, it's a small restaurant, it's not practical. Okay, you could say that like in a line or two, like your energy efficiency would be greatly enhanced by blah blah blah, right? But my recommendations, based on what I've observed and the employees I've talked to, are like, if you just do these 2 or 3 small things, you'll have a pretty good gain in sustainability. You'll be a little bit more green than you were at the beginning of this process. And so people respond to that much better than they typically respond to like, hey, aim for the absolute ideal, which sometimes is impossible. Often cases is impossible, right? So yeah. Okay, let me stop sharing this particular PDF. I want to mention one more thing, and then I'll open it up to questions. Okay, so if you go back to modules over here and you go to tools right here under modules, I've listed a lot of different tools that you can use for Well, basically calculating the carbon footprint, measuring energy use, different items related to sustainability. And I've given you kind of the kitchen sink here. You don't have to use all of them. For example, if you are interested in water use, you could click on the water use tools link. If you're interested in energy analysis, let's, for example, click on the energy analysis here. And then, can you see this one, Kelsey?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So if you go to the energy analysis one, there are a lot of energy calculators here. You see that on the right-hand side? Okay, so you can click on one of these, and you don't. Again, this is a laundry list. You don't have to use everything here, but you can use the ones that are relevant to you if you are trying to do that. Okay. The carbon fund, how we calculate, it's a pretty useful page. If you go to carbon fund, it gives you an example of how they actually calculate for residential or businesses the usage with certain types of energy sources. Okay, so if you kind of need a little bit of a primer or a tutorial on, I care about this business uses a lot of oil. Can I measure that somehow? Right. So this might be a place where you might find some information on that. Again, these are not the only resources that you have, right? One of the ways you discover resources is you kind of, click on a link, and then sometimes that leads you to a good link or a bad link, and you make your way through the various online sources. Or you can use the ones that I've listed. There's no right answer to this, but in the end, you have to figure out the methodology that makes sense for you. And that methodology, and this is very important, the methodology in your final report should be clear. Now, before you submit your final report, in a week, or I forget what the date, I think I've set the 25th as a deadline for this, but I've asked you to submit sort of a preliminary or a draft instrument. Like, what are you going to actually go out and do and measure, and what kinds of questions are you going to ask? Because I want to give you some feedback on this before you actually implement it. So you'll submit that, and then I'll give you feedback, and then you'll take the rest of the semester to kind of do it, and then in the end, you'll submit your final report. Okay, that's kind of how the process will work. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here. I want to open it up to, since you're the only one here.
Yeah, I have some questions.
Okay, let me just read the one question you put on the chat, which is how many employees do you suggest be surveyed? Again, no right answer here. I would say whatever they let you do. On the other hand, if the business has like 30 employees, and let's say some of them cannot answer questions related to the types of issues you're interested in, talk to people who can. Talk to the managers, talk to people who are interested in buying stuff, talk to the people who are in charge of the exact type of things that you're interested in. If you go to like an office, let's say on campus, and you're like, well, what do you guys do with all this paper that you kind of collect? And you go to the person who's working at the front desk, they may not be able to answer that question, but the office manager may be able to answer that question.
Right.
So ask the right people, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So I started on the audit already.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have a busy weekend, so I need to get this going.
Sure.
But so in terms of like what we need to include, I already have something like an employee survey, and obviously, like you said, this is for you to give us feedback and whether it's like we have enough things to ask. But then I know in terms of the assignment, I was just looking at the guidelines, and you said like the different related activities that are included within the audit. So I have a draft of an employee survey, and then I have an office survey information, which I think I looked at the what is it? Where did it go? Oh no, I looked at the sustainability assessment green audit, and they showed me something like that. So I took a lot of things from there that helped, but I went online, which also helped too. And then after it said like a site visit, do you suggest that I create, like, in terms of this part of the audit, should I like write two of the different things that I'm thinking of observing and some of the questions that I will think of while I'm there?
So I'm going to summarize what you just said, Kelsey. I think what Kelsey is asking is for the assignment that is due next week. What am I looking for?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to answer your question, yes, you described it pretty well, but let me summarize that again. What I'm looking for is basically, let's say you have imagine this, you have a piece of paper in your hand that tells you what you're exactly going to do in this audit. And so if you were to hand that piece of paper to somebody who didn't know, was not privy to what's going on in your head, they should be able to read that paper and implement your audit. So in that paper, a section might be, we'll look, utility analysis, look at monthly utility bills for the last 6 months. Part 1. Part 2 might be site visit. Observe things like bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3.
Okay.
Part 3, employee survey. Ask questions on bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3. That's just one example. Another type of instrument could be site visit and employee survey only. I'm not going to do the energy analysis. Okay, and these are the questions that I'm going to ask. So you have specific questions. I'm going to do an employee commute survey. These are the questions I have researched online. They're pretty good questions. I'm going to ask them. And when I go to the on-site, I'm going to look specifically at the number of people who are coming into work by bus or bicycles on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, let's say, or Monday and Wednesday. But all of that should ideally, it doesn't have to be, but ideally be on a piece of paper that is your instrument. The instrument is a thing that you could theoretically give to somebody else, and your audit would make sense to them. You're like, oh, I see what you're asking, and I think I can do this if I had to.
Right.
Something like that. Okay, because there's a lot of stuff you might have in your head that is not that's not clear. And I find that putting things to paper and then coming back and looking at them or having others read it makes it clearer, because it's sometimes muddled, or you're like, oh, I'm going to do this, and you think it's clear in your head, but when you put it on paper, it doesn't make sense, or some items are not very clearly explained.
Yeah, no, you explained this. I mean, I for some reason I thought it had to be more formal. So that's why I asked. But it makes sense to kind of put all of our thoughts on here, and the whole idea is that you're giving us feedback to see if what we're thinking of doing when we actually deal with this makes sense, and if it will make our methodology of our final report clear.
Sure. Yeah. And that's why sometimes these Zoom sessions are a little bit more helpful. But I will, when I post this, I'll also send a note out. Actually, is that like I in terms of grading, I think that's also students are often concerned about. I'm not going to be grading this hard. This is really to help you to do the best job you can in the end. So if you submit a pretty decent instrument, I'm going to say, oh, you're asking a lot of questions to employees. Have you considered going on site and looking at blah blah blah? I'll say something like that.
We can do but we can do both though, right?
Oh, of course.
I mean, okay, cool. Yeah. And then I know another part, and this is my other question, in terms of the focus group, I know that's something you included on there. Is that highly suggested? Because even though we have a question,
to pull off, I'll be honest. Yeah. I mean, I've given you the kitchen sink. You choose what you think you can do. Honestly, if you do a really good focus group, that itself is worth just as much as anything else that you do. If you only do a good focus group, but those are hard to do.
Right.
Yeah, focus group should ideally have 5, 6, 7 people.
Right.
Mediated well. It should ask good questions. It should really lead you to something that is useful and actionable. For example, politicians will use focus groups to tailor their messages, right? So there's an art to doing a focus group correctly, but you can. Focus group is not. I'll give you an example. This is not a focus group. You walk into an office and you're like, hey, can I just talk to you guys for a couple minutes in the conference room? I mean, kind of is a focus group. It's informal, but focus groups typically have a strategy, an agenda, a way the conversation is going to flow thought out beforehand.
Okay, that makes more sense. Cool. I think you answered everything I had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in.
Yes.
Hopefully others will see this and gather the courage to tune in.
Yes, of course. I know I have class at 9:30, so I just worked out. I was Awesome.
All right.
But I'll be sure to email you if I have any other questions. But I think it's great that we have all the resources in terms of calculating carbon footprint. I've used one of those like calculator things online before, but like when you said specific, like on the website that talked about just like, because I'm doing a restaurant, so like how they use the oil and things like that, calculating energy in that sense.
Right.
I think I'll be really relying on that, so I'll probably add that onto my
Yeah,
audit
you
as
can.
well.
I mean, sometimes for a restaurant, it's not just electricity, or let's say restaurants use a lot of depending on the size, they use blowers. Like blowers are also very energy intensive, or air handlers, and they use a lot of oil for cooking. People sometimes forget oil is energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. Okay, well, thank you again. I'm going to end the meeting now, and then I'll
Yes, thank
record this
you.
and post this as well, so others can also benefit from it.
Yes.
Okay, have a
Thank
good rest of
you.
the day. Thank you again.
You too. Bye.
Bye.